In any kind of design, it can be really important to involve those you're designing for and who are going to be the recipients of the design that you create. And it's especially important when designing evaluation approaches to include the people who are going to be evaluated in that design, as they may have a really good idea as to what should be measured and evaluated and why, as well as how it should be measured and how that data should be collected. It is in this capacity that participatory design and co-design can be useful approaches to developing a more representative, inclusive, and meaningful evaluation strategy. The idea of participatory design is implied in its name, to have a design process that involves the end users and those affected by the design. We can also think of something called co-design, which takes a more collaborative approach to designing with the people who are the target of the end product, whatever that product is going to be. And the difference is subtle, but it's important to think about. When we think about participatory design, the idea is implied in the name. It's to have a design process that involves the end users and those who are affected by the design. And this can be compared to co-design, which involves the target of the design being involved throughout the entire process. Furthermore, in co-design, decision-making power and control resides with the target audience, where in participatory design, they might only be somewhat involved at a certain point. I mean, the goal of both is to have inclusion, right? That we want people who are going to be the target of the design involved in the design process. The difference just lies in the extent to which they're involved in that process and how much control they have over that process. A way I like to think about it is comparing the ideas of designing at, designing for, designing with, and designing against. When we think about designing at, it's that traditional design approach where people, maybe engineers, no offense engineers, create a design that they think is the best for a given situation, and they design it and they just unleash it on the world. They give it to the people who are going to be using it, and they have to make do with whatever it is. When we think about designing for, we're thinking more about traditional design thinking approaches, where through research, the end users, the target audiences, their needs are understood, their worlds are understood through that research is then taken back to the design team, who then use it to create a design. And maybe along the way, there's some additional input through prototyping to refine elements of the design. Designing with is a much more inclusive, collaborative approach, where the people who are going to be the target of the design are part of that process throughout. And not only part of the process, but can have decision-making authority over what goes forward. Designing against, we can think about dark patterns in design, where designs are done to get people to do things that aren't in their best interest or they otherwise might not do, or to make it difficult for them to do things, like getting rid of those subscriptions that you have to services you no longer need, but you can't figure out how to get rid of them. So that might be a helpful way to think about the differences between how we approach design and how we approach the end users, the target audience of our design. Getting back to participatory design and co-design, this helpful graphic from Passio shows the amount of participation that can be involved when moving from a consultation approach to a co-production and co-design approach. We just need to remember that participation is something that does not necessarily mean the people have a say in the outcome and are considered to be full partners. I can consult my children on what they would like to have for dinner, but I ultimately have design authority. And so even though I might ask them their opinion, my opinion is ultimately the one that matters. But when we're trying to be more fully collaborative, we want to allow people to have decision-making power and have a greater say in the outcomes of the design. UX professional Erin Casali also provides really useful insights and advice in terms of creating a co-production and co-design process. She suggests creating a straw man concept.
You're going to see a wizard? Do you think if I went with you, this wizard would give me some brains?
Through the collection and synthesis of ideas, comments, and votes from those target audiences, which are then used to generate ideas. So the straw man is the initial result, a kind of prototype of everything that's been collected and all of the commentary and voting that's been done through the co-design process. The straw man concept then allows for additional comments, feedback, and votes through a process of building and iterating. The outcome is the first release of whatever is being built. As with a straw man argument in philosophy, the idea of it is to be knocked down. It's not meant to be the final design version. It's just meant to be an initial attempt to create a final design. And its purpose is to stimulate commentary, and further ideas from the participants to allow the design to go forward in a better way. Additionally, she lists 5 reasons as to why such an approach is useful. 1, it stressed the importance of participation at every step and empowering the stakeholders with the decisions. 2, it shows a clear leadership required to keep focus and make the difficult holistic design decisions that make committee-led projects fail. 3, it shows different amounts of creative design and development stages, and it's sequential in nature, but at the same time, a highly iterative and collaborative process. 4, the various phases can be compressed or expanded as long as they are present in some form. For example, a collection stage could last a few hours with everyone in the room to many months from an online audience. And 5, works for big worldwide international campaigns, for open source project, for agency work with clients, and for small teams. Now, I would say here, in terms of evaluation processes, empowerment is a key element. Making people feel empowered, having a sense of ownership over the process is really important. And another thing that's really important is fostering inclusive leadership. Rather than evaluating being directed at people, done in collaboration with them. Going back to this idea of designing at or designing with, we want to be evaluating with, not evaluating at. We also can turn to the idea of design justice as part of creating an inclusive, participatory, and co-designed evaluation process. According to the Design Justice Network, design justice rethinks design processes, centers people who are normally marginalized by design, and uses collaborative, creative practices to address the deepest challenges our communities face. Typically in design justice, they're thinking about communities in a social sense that have traditionally been marginalized within society through injustice, institutionalized discrimination, lack of access to power, things like that. But we can also pull some of these elements into our evaluation design process as well. So we can make these processes more equitable and more just. For instance, we can look at Principle 2, which states, we center the voices of those who are directly impacted by the outcome of the design process. And that's clear that employees are impacted by evaluation processes. It would then make sense to center on their voices when designing evaluation regimes. We want them to be included because they're the ones who are going to be the most impacted by the design process. Also useful is Principle 3, which states, we prioritize design's impact on the community over the intentions of the designer. In terms of designing evaluation programs, we do need to consider what the impact of those programs will be on the people who are experiencing them, what the impact will have on employee experience and their work and their professional development. Such an orientation will require that we see what behaviors are affected by those programs, both in intended and unintended ways. When we measure things, when we reward certain things, it's going to encourage certain behaviors. So what behaviors are being encouraged? What behaviors are we seeing emerge from the evaluation process? And regardless of what the intent of the program was, we really do need to be careful to understand and pay attention to what the outcomes actually are. Finally, we can look at Principle 5, which states, we see the role of the designer as a facilitator rather than an expert. I really like this one because I always think that the expertise of people and people at work is often devalued. An important part of this principle is to see the people themselves as experts whose expertise needs to be appreciated, understood, and incorporated. As indicated in the models examined here in this series of videos, the designer's role is to help facilitate the use of their expertise and to help coordinate its incorporation into the design process. Also, the goal of the designer as a facilitator is to communicate goals, decisions, and outcomes. It's not to lord over the process and compel it in the direction they want to see it go. It's to help facilitate in the direction it needs to go, which is a very different thing, but it's a very important thing. Finally, when thinking about participatory design and co-design, it's important to remember key concepts provided by the Interaction Design Foundation regarding participatory design. These include inclusion. Make sure you have a diverse range of participants, which can mean different types and different categories of employees from across the organization. Collaboration. Use collaborative activities to garner their insights and knowledge as well as ideas. Empowerment. Allow participants to actually influence design and decision-making throughout the process. Iteration. Use continuous feedback and improvement suggestions to modify and tweak the approach. Contextual understanding. Appreciate the employee understanding of context in which they work and in which the evaluation should be considered. And finally, user or employee advocacy. I added employee advocacy here since we are talking about employee evaluation, but the key is to allow the employees to advocate for themselves and their points of view. As they say, the goal is to create an equal and safe space for collaboration and co-design. Of course, when taking this kind of approach, it will be important to live the outcome of this participatory co-design process. And by that, I mean, you need to be committed to it. There's nothing worse than saying you're doing, collaborative work in which people are going to be included and then have them feel not included and have them feel like it's all performative. It's all just for show, that you really don't mean it. You aren't committed to the idea. Those who are being evaluated will need to know that their input is being taken seriously and that it does matter. Again, don't be performative. Nothing kills trust and community faster than performative measures that aren't meant to be taken seriously or that leadership isn't committed to. And finally, remember, the goal here is to create a process that people feel they are a part of and not just being subjected to. They want to feel like they're being designed with and not designed at, or even worse, designed against. By doing so, you will ideally create an evaluation process that's inclusive, representative, just, and ideally beneficial to all involved.